A young couple, eager to start a new chapter in life, set off for a remote barrio in Negros. They had heard stories, whispers of strange happenings in the area, but brushed them off as mere folklore. For them, this was an opportunity, a fresh start, a chance to build their dreams away from the noise of the city. But as they journeyed deeper into the heart of the province, the dense forests and the eerie silence that hung in the air made them uneasy. It was as if the land itself was hiding a secret, something unseen yet always watching. They arrived just before sundown. The village was small, with only a handful of houses scattered across the vast landscape. The people were kind but quiet, their eyes filled with something the couple couldn't quite place. Was it fear, or was it a warning? An old woman, hunched with age, approached them as they settled into their new home. Her voice was a whisper carried by the wind. Sa gabi, huwag kayong lalabas. Huwag kayong magpapakita. The words lingered in the air long after she walked away. They laughed it off, thinking it was just an old woman's superstition. But as the night fell and darkness swallowed the village whole, an unsettling feeling crept into their bones. The silence was too deep, too unnatural. Then from the distance, a faint sound, like the flapping of wings, but heavier, slower. A chill ran down their spines. The couple locked their doors, telling themselves it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But then came the scratching, slow, deliberate, right outside their wooden walls. It was as if something or someone was testing the barrier between them and the night. The wife grabbed her husband's arm, her fingers cold with fear. Ano yun? She whispered. He held his breath, straining to listen. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a long, low growl echoed from just outside their window. Not the sound of a dog or any animal they knew. It was something else, something unnatural. Their hearts pounded as they stayed frozen in place, afraid to even breathe. And then, as quickly as it started, the night went still again. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. The couple didn't dare move until the first light of dawn began to creep through the cracks of their small home. Had it all been a dream? A trick of the mind? Or had they just come face to face with something beyond human understanding? Little did they know, this was only the beginning. Morning arrived, but the uneasiness from the night before still clung to the couple like a shadow. The sun had risen, yet the village felt eerily quiet. As they stepped outside, they noticed something strange. The ground around their house was disturbed, as if something had circled their home over and over. The husband crouched down, touching the dirt. There were no footprints, no clear marks, just deep, uneven scratches in the soil, as though something had been clawing at the earth itself. The villagers watched them from a distance. Their expressions were unreadable, but their silence spoke volumes. The old woman from the day before appeared again, her wrinkled face grim. She pointed at the ground, then at the couple. Hindi ito para sa inyo. Umuwi na kayo habang kaya pa. The wife shuddered. Bakit po? Ano pong ibig niyong sabihin? She asked, but the old woman simply shook her head and walked away. Determined to understand, the husband decided to ask around. He approached a group of men repairing a wooden fence. At first, they hesitated to speak, exchanging uneasy glances. But one of them finally muttered, May gumagala rito tuwing gabi. Hindi tao. The words sent a chill down his spine. He tried to laugh it off, but the seriousness in their eyes made it impossible. Kung may marinig kayong kahit anong ingay sa gabi, huwag kayong sisilip, kahit anong mangyari. That night, as the couple lay in bed, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves outside made them tense. The wife gripped her husband's hand tightly under the blanket. They told themselves it was just the wind, just their nerves playing tricks. But deep inside, they knew something was out there, watching, waiting. A sudden thump on the roof made their hearts stop. Then another. It was slow, deliberate, like footsteps, heavy, unnatural. The wife squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to move. The husband held his breath. Then a sound neither of them would ever forget. A low, guttural voice, whispering, calling. Their names. The wife's nails dug into her husband's arm. Hindi mo yan imagination, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The whisper stopped. The air felt thick, suffocating. Then a scraping noise ran along the walls of their home, slow and patient, as if whatever was outside already knew. They had nowhere to run. The couple stayed frozen, their breaths shallow, listening to the eerie sound tracing the wooden walls of their home. The scratching was slow, almost thoughtful, like whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted them to know it was there. Then just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was the kind of silence that made the wife's skin prickle, the kind that felt like something was waiting. The husband reached for the bolo knife he had placed near the bed earlier, gripping it tightly. He didn't know what he was up against, but he refused to let fear paralyze him. He motioned for his wife to stay still as he slowly stood up, moving toward the window. His pulse pounded in his ears as he reached for the curtain. Just a quick peek, just to know if something was really there. Before he could lift the fabric, a loud knock, sharp and deliberate, echoed from the front door. The wife let out a small gasp, covering her mouth immediately. The knock came again, harder this time. 3 slow, heavy raps. They weren't alone. A voice followed, low and hoarse. "Bukas! Alam kong nandyan kayo!" Their blood ran cold. It wasn't a voice they recognized. It didn't even sound entirely human. The husband clenched his jaw, gripping the knife even tighter. The wife's hands trembled as she held onto his arm. Then, as if sensing their fear, the voice let out a chuckle. Soft at first, then growing into something unnatural, something wrong. The laughter echoed through the night, dragging on until it melted into the wind. And just like that, the presence outside was gone. But they knew it would be back. The couple barely slept. Even as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in their wooden walls, an overwhelming sense of dread lingered. The husband checked outside the moment the sun was fully up, his heart pounding as he stepped onto the damp earth. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But the scratches on the walls were deeper now, like claws had raked against them over and over. The villagers watched him with the same wary eyes, but no one spoke. It was as if acknowledging what happened would only make things worse. The old woman from before appeared again, this time holding a bundle of dried herbs. She shoved them into his hands. "Itali mo yan sa pinto at bintana. Hindi yan solusyon, pero makakatulong." The husband didn't question her. He did as he was told, tying the herbs around their home, whispering silent prayers as he worked. The wife sat inside, hands gripping her lap, her eyes darting to every corner of the room, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Night fell too quickly. The moment the last bit of sunlight disappeared, the air turned heavy. The wind outside howled, but beneath it, something else lurked. A faint, shuffling sound, circling their home. Then came the whispers again. This time closer, more insistent. The wife clamped her hands over her ears, her body trembling. The husband held the bolo knife tightly, his knuckles white. The knocking returned, harder than before, shaking the door in its frame. And then, the door latch lifted. Their breaths caught. Whatever was outside was coming in. The latch lifted slowly, as if whatever was outside was toying with them, savoring the fear thick in the air. The husband stepped in front of his wife, gripping the bolo knife so tightly his hand ached. The door creaked, shifting ever so slightly, but just as it was about to open, a sudden, deafening knock rattled the entire house. It wasn't from the door, it came from the roof. A heavy thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving. Something big. The wooden beams groaned under the weight. The couple froze, their eyes darting upward. The roof wasn't strong enough to hold something that heavy. Then, an ear-piercing screech tore through the silence, unlike anything they had ever heard before. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something in between, a sickening mixture of both. The wife whimpered, her nails digging into her husband's arm. The old woman's warning echoed in the husband's mind. "Wag kayong lalabas. Wag kayong magpapakita." But they had no choice now. If that thing got inside, there would be nowhere to run. The scratching on the roof turned frantic, as if it was growing impatient. Then silence. For a brief, terrifying moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the suffocating weight of anticipation. Then, crash. Something massive dropped from the roof, landing just outside their door with a sickening thud. Dust and debris shook loose from the ceiling. The wife let out a choked gasp, her entire body trembling. The husband took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to move, to hide, to run. But where? A new sound slithered into the air. Breathing. Deep, ragged, unnatural. Slow steps dragged against the dirt. The husband tightened his grip on the knife. The door, still slightly ajar, revealed nothing but darkness beyond it. And then, a voice. Low, distorted, mocking. Alam kong gising pa kayo. The wife's breath hitched. She shook her head violently, tears brimming in her eyes. The husband's stomach dropped. The voice, it was familiar. It sounded like his own. The husband's grip on the bolo knife loosened for just a second. His own voice, distorted, hollow, echoed from beyond the door. The wife clutched his arm, shaking her head frantically, pleading with her eyes, but he couldn't move. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. Then the voice spoke again. Buksan mo. Alam mong kailangan mong makita. Something in the words made his skin crawl. It wasn't just imitation, it was knowing. Whatever was out there, it understood him in a way that it shouldn't. The wife pulled at his arm, snapping him back to the present. He couldn't listen. He wouldn't. Summoning his courage, he took a deep breath and did the only thing he could think of. He reached for the bundle of herbs tied to the door and threw it outside. The moment the dried leaves hit the ground, an ear-piercing screech filled the air, like something was being burned alive. The door shuddered violently, as if something had slammed into it. The wife screamed, covering her ears. The husband held his ground, his whole body shaking as the air around them pulsed with a force beyond human understanding. And then, silence. The night, once thick with unseen horrors, was suddenly still. Even the wind had stopped. The couple stood frozen, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Slowly, cautiously, the husband inched forward and peered through the small gap in the door. The ground was empty. No footprints, no scratches, nothing. But the air felt wrong, charged with something unseen, something waiting. He stepped back, shutting the door tightly, locking it for good measure. He turned to his wife, who was still shaking. Tapos na, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. They didn't sleep that night. They stayed huddled together waiting for the sun, and when morning finally came, they wasted no time. They packed whatever they could carry and left the village without looking back. But as they reached the main road, the wife gasped, clutching her husband's arm in terror. He followed her gaze. There on the dusty path ahead was a single set of footprints, deep, heavy, leading away from their home. The problem was, neither of them had walked that way. The couple stood frozen, staring at the deep footprints on the road. The morning sun cast long shadows over them, but the warmth did nothing to ease the chill creeping through their bones. The tracks were fresh, as if whatever had been outside their home last night had walked away only moments before. But there was no one in sight, no villagers, no strangers, just the eerie silence of the empty road. The wife gripped her husband's arm tightly. Ano to? Bakit nandito to? Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. The husband swallowed hard, his mind racing. The footprints led away from their house, disappearing into the dense forest beyond the village. A part of him wanted to follow them, to know the truth, but a stronger instinct screamed at him to leave, to never look back. They hurried toward the nearest town, their footsteps quick, their hearts pounding. As they walked, they tried to convince themselves that they were safe now, that whatever had tormented them was gone, but neither of them spoke it out loud. Some things they had learned were better left unsaid. When they finally reached civilization, the bustling streets and noise of the town felt surreal, like stepping into another world. People laughed, vendors called out their goods. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. But the couple knew better. Days turned into weeks, and though they had left the village behind, the fear never fully disappeared. The wife would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, convinced she had heard the whispers again. The husband would sometimes catch his own reflection in the mirror and feel his stomach drop, remembering the voice that had mimicked him so perfectly. One day the husband decided to go back to the village, not to stay, but to seek answers. He needed to understand what had happened. But when he arrived, he found nothing. The houses were abandoned. The village, once small but full of life, was now empty. The wind howled through the trees, carrying only silence in return. Confused and unsettled, he asked the nearby townspeople what had happened. Their faces turned pale at the mention of the village. One man, old and weary, simply shook his head. Matagal nang walang nakatira ron. The husband's breath caught in his throat. Pero, 2 buwan lang ang nakalipas mula nung umalis kami. The old man looked at him, his expression dark. Hindi imposible, kasi ang baryong yon, matagal nang iniwan. Wala nang buhay doon, matagal na. A cold dread filled the husband's chest. If the village had been abandoned all along, who or what had been watching them that night?